A millionaire at the airport suddenly received a call from his daughter, who urgently communicated, "They're not breathing anymore." What the little girl explained next caused him to panic, race out of the airport, and speed like lightning toward home. The business class lounge at JFK Airport always had that distinct aroma, a blend of expensive coffee and hushed, intense silence. Robert quickly reviewed the merger contract in his hand. Every figure was flawless. He was a devotee of logic. His life resembled a perfectly coded, error-free Excel spreadsheet. But the bright red weather alert flashing on his phone screen made him pause major tempest descending upon the New York suburbs. The monotone, urgent announcement for the flight to Dubai echoed over the loudspeaker. At the same moment, his phone vibrated violently on the glass tabletop. Robert frowned. The caller ID displayed Bella. According to his unwavering rule for the past 10 years, Robert never took calls right before boarding. He extended his finger to press the reject button. Bella was only 7. She was probably calling to show off a clumsy drawing or complain because she couldn't find a hair bow. But his finger stopped mid-air. A chill coursed down his spine, that illogical feeling he often called a hunch. He slid the button to answer. There was no usual cheerful, "Hello?" Only the static of a spotty phone connection and the resounding boom of thunder at the other end. "Daddy." Bella's voice was strained, caught in her throat as if she were trying to swallow a piece of cold rock. "Bella, it's Daddy. What's the matter? I'm about to board. The habitat fractured, Daddy." Her voice whispered, trembling. "They've stopped taking air. My friends have stopped taking air. The flow swept everything away." Robert exhaled. It must be the glass ant farm habitat he'd purchased last week. She must have accidentally dropped it. He lowered his voice, trying to project the calm, problem-solving tone of a parent. "All right, Bella, listen to me. It's just a glass container. I'll get a brand new one. Now please hand the phone to Elena. Mommy will help you clean up the mess." There was a long silence on the other end. Only the sound of the rain lashing fiercely against the windows remained. "I can't reach Mommy." Bella's voice suddenly became panicked, more rapid. "Elena is out in the garden. She won't come inside." "She's completely drenched, Daddy." Out in the garden, Robert furrowed his brow. Why would she be in the yard during this kind of downpour? She's turning over the soil. Bella hiccuped a sound that shredded Robert's forced composure. "She's holding a huge implement. She just keeps turning." And then she chuckles. "Daddy," her lighthearted sound is unsettling. It's not like the way Mommy usually sounds. Chuckle. Robert shot up from his seat, the leather chair tumbling to the floor with a crash. The surrounding passengers turned to look at him with mild concern. The image of Elena, his generally quiet, reserved wife, suddenly materialized in his mind with a distorted smirk under the pouring night rain. It was absurd. It was unsettling. "Stay right there in your room. Lock the door. I'll call Mommy immediately." He ended the call, his fingers trembling as he dialed Elena's number. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. "Hello, this is Elena. I'm currently unavailable to take your call." The frigid voicemail message played. Robert slammed the phone down, called again. Still that deafening silence. He looked out the airport's vast window. Outside, the raindrops began striking the glass forcefully, running down like elongated scratch marks. What in the world was Elena doing? Was she neglecting his frightened child inside to go play with soil in a storm? Or was she having one of her crazy, artistic spells again? "Sir, please proceed to Gate 4. We are preparing for closure." The ground staff attendant approached, offering a practiced, professional smile. Robert looked at her, then down at the designer suitcase at his feet. The multi-million-dollar contract in Dubai. The career he had built over many years. Everything was weighed against a phone call from a 7-year-old child. "Cancel the passage," Robert said curtly, grabbing his suitcase and rushing off, leaving the attendant bewildered. "I am not going." He sprinted like a person in distress to the taxi stand. The rain was intensifying, stinging his face. He scrambled into the first cab. "To the suburbs. As fast as you can. I'll triple the fee." In the car, Robert frantically opened his security camera application on his phone. He needed to see the living room to confirm Bella was okay. Signal lost. The screen was pitch black with the red error message. The smart electrical system he was so proud of installing had failed, or someone had intentionally deactivated it. Nasty weather out there, friend. The African-American driver looked through the rearview mirror, shaking his head with dismay. Radio says it's a level 3 squall. Everyone else is tucked in bed and you're rushing out. Robert didn't reply. His mind was consumed by the sound of thunder and the image of the implement in Elena's hand. Lately, she'd complained of headaches, been irritable with Bella, and once he even saw her staring at a fruit-slicing utensil for an hour. He had assumed it was stress from unemployment. But what if it wasn't stress? What if she truly was emotionally unbalanced? The vehicle zoomed into the night, leaving the city lights behind. The trees lining the road swayed like immense ghostly figures. 45 minutes later, the car screeched to a halt in front of the estate's gates. The house was completely engulfed in darkness. Not a single light shone from the windows. It stood there, immense and silent, like a tomb in the white rainstorm. Keep the remainder. Robert tossed a $100 bill to the driver and rushed out. The main gate was unlocked. The heavy iron door groaned as he pushed it open. Elena, Bella. His shout was instantly snatched away by the wind. He shoved the wooden door open and stepped inside the house. The hallway was pitch black, permeated with the stench of dampness and soil. Robert hurried inward, fumbling for the light switch, though he knew it was futile. Crunch. A dry, brittle sound resonated beneath his expensive leather shoe. It wasn't the hardwood floor. It was gritty and sharp like fractured glass, and immediately after he felt something wet, sticky seep through his sock, adhering to the sole of his foot. It wasn't rainwater. It was thicker, more viscous. Robert's heart momentarily skipped a beat. He froze in the darkness, not daring to lift his foot to move further. Robert pulled out his phone, his hand shaking so much he nearly dropped it onto the sticky floor. The scattered flashlight beams swept around, illuminating the scene of disarray at his feet. It was black sludge, mixed with rainwater, glistening with sharp fragments of fractured glass. The ant farm he had meticulously ordered from Amazon was now just rubble. The flashlight quickly scanned the living room. Robert's heart nearly stopped. Under the oak dining table, a tiny silhouette was curled up. Bella sat there, hugging her knees, clutching her worn-out plush toy tightly to her chest. Robert rushed over, dropping to his knees, pulling the little girl into his embrace. Her body was ice-cold and stiff as a board. "Daddy's here now. Everything's all right, sweetheart." Bella didn't respond, nor did she weep. She slowly raised a tiny, trembling finger, pointing straight out to the garden where the storm was howling. A flash of lightning ripped across the night sky, briefly illuminating the entire yard. There, amidst the white sheet of rain, a figure was standing. Elena. She was wearing a thin, soaked silk nightgown, clinging tightly to her body, her long black hair matted and hanging down, obscuring half her face. But the strangest thing was the large, pitch-black protective lenses completely covering her eyes, looking bizarre and out of place in the fierce storm. "Stay right here, okay?" Robert whispered, placing Bella back on the sofa. He took off his shoes and rushed out the back door barefoot. The freezing mud reached up to his ankles. Rain lashed painfully against Robert's face. He ran toward Elena, who was still absorbed in an activity on the ground. She didn't seem to notice his presence, or she simply didn't care. Elena was moving soil. Each heavy implement full of mud was tossed into a small indentation, the rhythm unnervingly steady. Her mouth mumbled meaningless, disjointed sounds, merging with the whistling wind. Robert approached, aiming his flashlight directly at his wife's face. Elena turned around. That moment haunted Robert forever after. Under the blinding flashlight, Elena's facial muscles twitched repeatedly, contracting into a distorted, bizarre smirk. The corners of her mouth curled high, but her lips were blue and trembling. She looked like a broken marionette, simultaneously smirking and exhibiting distress. "What in the world are you doing out here?" Robert snatched the implement from her hand, throwing it forcefully away. It clanged loudly against the iron fence. He grabbed her shoulders and shook her hard, his fingers sinking deep into her thin flesh. The girl is terrified inside. "Why are you out here messing with soil wearing protective lenses in the middle of the night?" Elena staggered, nearly falling. She didn't resist, nor did she push him away. She just stood there, wilted like a banana leaf after a storm. Her voice emerged hoarse, dry, and surprisingly devoid of emotion. "Cover it up to cleanse it. If it fractured, why keep it? It's all just debris anyway." That indifferent attitude was like oil poured onto the raging fire of Robert's anger. Did she consider his efforts, his daughter's fear, to be debris? "What did you say?" Robert roared louder than the thunder. "You cruel woman, I made a mistake bringing you into this house. You are emotionally compromised. You intended to harm the girl, didn't you?" Elena remained still, her head slightly bowed. Through the dark protective lenses, he couldn't see her eyes, only an oppressive silence. "Get out." Robert pointed toward the main gate, his finger trembling with fury. "Leave my house immediately. I don't want to ever see you again. Don't you dare return." He waited for a plea, or at least an explanation, a confrontation. He wanted her to be tearful, to cling to him, so he would have an excuse to relent. But Elena did nothing. She merely raised her hand, slowly adjusting the frame of the protective lenses sliding down her nose, a calm, almost mocking gesture given the circumstances. Then she nodded. A light, submissive nod, as if she'd been expecting this moment of expulsion for a very long time. She didn't look toward the house where Bella was hiding behind the window curtain. She didn't look at Robert either. Elena turned her back and walked away. Her bare feet stumbled slightly over the sharp gravel path leading to the gate. Her thin, frail silhouette in the sheer nightgown quickly disappeared, swallowed by the darkness and the squall. Robert stood frozen in the yard, breathing heavily, rainwater streaming down his face. He watched until her shadow vanished behind the iron gate. His anger subsided, leaving behind a hollow and cold feeling. He turned to go back inside to his daughter. His foot tripped over a small, soft mound of soil, the spot Elena had just covered. Robert bent down and shone his light on it. It was a small, carefully piled up, rounded dirt mound, and neatly planted on the apex was a broken, thorny rose stem, its deep crimson petals scattered over the black mud, looking like a hastily constructed miniature burial site. Robert stood paralyzed, staring at the small soil mound, a chilling sensation running down his spine. The broken rose branch hung down like a desperate hand, waving a final farewell. He spun around, hurried back into the house, slammed the glass door shut, and carefully secured the latch. The dry click sound echoed, separating him and Bella from the darkness, the storm, and the unstable woman he had just banished. He carried Bella upstairs. The little girl had passed out on his shoulder from exhaustion, her hand still clutching the stuffed toy. After tucking her into bed and covering her securely, Robert went back down to the living room. He grabbed a broom and cursorily swept up the shattered glass fragments and mud. Every stroke of the broom was an effort to wipe away Elena's trace from this house, from his and his daughter's lives. A week passed. The storm had cleared and the suburban sky was as blue as if nothing had ever happened. The estate returned to its habitual order. There were no more piano sounds late at night, no more shadows pacing listlessly in the garden. Robert believed he had done the right thing. This fabricated peace was exactly what he and his daughter needed. Dinner was particularly quiet tonight. Robert stood in the kitchen fussing over a pot of chicken and sweet corn soup. This was Elena's specialty, the only dish Bella would eat when she lacked an appetite. He tried to recall the recipe she used: shredded chicken breast, sweet corn, a little cream, and parsley. The aroma was rich and appetizing. He confidently ladled a full bowl and placed it in front of Bella. "Eat up, sweetie. Special chicken soup made by Daddy, better than any restaurant." Bella sat on her high chair, swinging her legs. She looked at the steaming soup, then at her father, her expression showing a hint of hesitation. She picked up the spoon, scooped a small portion, blew on it, and put it in her mouth. Robert held his breath, waiting for praise. But immediately Bella grimaced, spitting the bite of soup onto the napkin beside her plate. She pushed the bowl away, shaking her head vigorously. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Is it too hot, too salty?" Robert quickly wiped her mouth, his heart sinking. "No, sir," Bella mumbled. It tastes odd. Odd how I tasted it. It's savory and has a lovely corn aroma. Exactly. It's too sweet." Bella looked up at her father with wide, innocent eyes. "It doesn't taste like Elena's soup." Elena's soup had a strongly unpalatable flavor. Robert froze the spoon in his hand, clattering onto the table. "Unpalatable?" he asked, skeptical. "How can chicken soup taste strongly unpalatable?" "Are you sure you're not mistaken? I'm positive," Bella affirmed with certainty, her young voice surprisingly authoritative. "Elena said it was medicinal. She said unpalatable substances often aid recovery." After eating the unpalatable soup, I felt strong like a superhero and didn't catch common illnesses. And also, she hesitated for a moment and then continued. "After eating it, I got very drowsy. Slept straight until morning and didn't have any unsettling dreams." Robert frowned. His daughter's naive words were like messy puzzle pieces beginning to fall into place, forming a suspicious picture. Elena had never let him taste Bella's food. She always insisted on doing the cooking for the girl, often bringing it upstairs to her room and closing the door to coax her into eating. He had assumed it was her way of showing affection or trying to make up for not being her biological mother. But unpalatable soup, profound drowsiness. A dark thought flashed through Robert's mind. Could she have been adding some kind of prohibited substance to Bella's food to make her sleep soundly so she wouldn't have to keep an eye on her, or to keep her sluggish and unable to communicate the activities she was involved in? "Daddy, I don't want to eat anymore. I want the strongly unpalatable soup." Bella pushed the bowl further away. "There is no strongly unpalatable soup." Robert snapped, his voice slightly raised, making Bella flinch. He quickly lowered his tone, stroking her head. "I mean, unpalatable soup isn't good for you, sweetheart. Eat this one. This is nutritious." But Bella pursed her lips tightly, refusing to eat anymore. Robert sighed, clearing the soup bowl away. The suspicion he harbored about Elena's character was no longer a hypothesis. It was slowly becoming a throbbing, painful tumor. That woman was not just emotionally unstable. She was dangerous. After tucking Bella into bed, Robert didn't go to his home office as usual. He went straight up to the master bedroom on the second floor, the room Elena had occupied for the past 2 years. Since she left, he hadn't set foot in it, leaving the door locked as if sealing off a crime scene. He turned the doorknob. The door swung open, releasing a rush of cold air into the hallway. The room was dark, the curtains tightly drawn. Robert switched on the light. A familiar scent hit his nose, but it wasn't the expensive perfume Elena used for parties. It was a strong, pungent scent of peppermint essential oil, sharp enough to make his eyes water. Robert grabbed a large black refuse bag. He began roughly gathering all of Elena's clothes from the closet, tossing them into the bag. Silk dresses, wool coats, scarves, all felt feather-light. She had lost so much weight. Most of her clothes were baggy. He approached the bed. The sheets were still wrinkled as if she had just left. Robert picked up Elena's pillow, intending to strip the case for washing. He froze. On the pristine white pillow fabric, long strands of black hair were stuck. Not just a few stray strands, but balls of shed hair tightly tangled in the fibers. Robert used 2 fingers to pinch up a cluster of hair. It was dry, brittle, like dead grass. The amount of hair loss was alarmingly unusual. He shuddered, recalling the times he saw Elena brushing her hair for a long time in the bathroom and the faint humming of the vacuum cleaner every morning. Could she be ill? Robert immediately dismissed the thought. No way. If she were ill, she would have whined and complained, demanding his attention. He knew her dramatic nature. It must be due to hair dyeing or excessive styling, or, worse exactly, as the neighbor had suggested, she was addicted to something. Addicts often experience hair loss, pale skin, and erratic behavior just like her. A degenerate indeed. Robert muttered forcefully, tossing the hair clump into the refuse bag with mounting contempt. He stripped off the pillowcase, balling it up. Holding the white fabric full of shed hair, he felt disgusted, as if touching something contaminated. He quickly left the room, heading down to the laundry room in the basement. The washing machine started its regular low hum. The strong scent of fabric softener couldn't mask the haunting peppermint smell in his mind. Robert leaned his back against the washer, letting out a long sigh. Finally, everything was gone. Tomorrow he would call someone to repaint the room, replacing all the furnishings. There would be no trace of Elena left. He turned to leave, reaching for the light switch. Clink. The toe of his leather shoe struck something small, which rolled out from under the detergent cabinet and onto the center of the floor. Robert bent down. It was a small, crumpled ball the size of a fist, lying still under the cold, white fluorescent light. He picked it up slowly, unraveling it. It was a small white handkerchief embroidered with lavender flowers in the corner, the kind of classic handkerchief Elena liked to use. But now its whiteness was heavily stained. Robert squinted, looking closely. Dark reddish-brown streaks, dry and stiff, made the fabric rough. It looked like smudged lipstick or spilled red wine. He brought it to his nose. A strong, metallic odor hit him, overpowering the pleasant detergent scent in the room. Blood. Not just a few small nosebleed droplets. The handkerchief was soaked so saturated that when it dried, it was stiff as starch. It had been crumpled up and hastily stuffed under the cabinet as if its owner had just gone through a severe coughing fit, a horrifying episode of vomiting blood, and desperately tried to conceal it in a panic. Robert stared at the blood-soaked handkerchief for a long time, a feeling of dread creeping up his spine. But then logic, the most powerful tool of an investor, took over. He tossed the handkerchief into the wastebasket, the lid closing with a sharp thud, burying the doubt. It must just be a nosebleed, he told himself. The air was dry this season. Bella often had nosebleeds, and Elena was careless. He shouldn't overthink women's issues. He dragged himself back to his room, trying to coax himself into a fitful sleep with the faint lingering scent of peppermint somewhere in the air. The next morning, the blaring alarm clock dragged Robert from his nightmare. It was 7:30 a.m. They were late for school. He sprang up, rushing to his daughter's room, his hair disheveled. Bella. "Get up now, honey. You'll miss the school transport." Bella rubbed her eyes and sat up, yawning widely. She wasn't as panicked as her father, just slowly slid off the bed. "Daddy, what should I put on today?" Robert flung open her closet door. A chaotic mess met his eyes. Sweaters, dresses, tights draped haphazardly, the result of a week of him playing single parent. He rummaged frantically for the uniform shirt, but things were missing. The blouse hadn't been pressed. The skirt had a chocolate stain from yesterday. "Blast it," Robert muttered, fumbling. "Just put this on for now, sweetheart." He handed her an old t-shirt and a pair of slightly tight jeans. Bella stood looking at him, her wide eyes momentarily clouded with disappointment. She sighed a sigh, much older than her 7 years. She gently pushed her father's hand away and walked toward the closet, reaching up to the top shelf Robert had never paid attention to. "You don't need to look there, Daddy. Elena put them up here." The top closet door opened. Robert was stunned. Inside was a world entirely different from the mess below. Dozens of outfits were neatly folded, stacked into piles. Each set was encased in a clear plastic bag containing a shirt, dress, tights, and even a matching hair bow. But what surprised Robert the most was a bright yellow smiley face sticker affixed to each bag. On each smiling face, numbers were neatly written in black marker, day 1, day 2, day 3, stretching all the way to day 60. "What is this?" Robert asked. His voice strained. Bella pulled out the bag marked day 7, hugging it to her chest. "Elena made them, sir. She did it last month. She said she was going on a very long trip and was worried you wouldn't know how to pick my clothes, so she prepared them in advance. She said if I just wear one bag each day, I'll be the prettiest in class." Robert took the bag from his daughter's hand. He stared at the smiley face sticker. Below the number day 7 was a small line of text written in blue pen, the handwriting shaky and uneven, like an elderly person learning to write, "It's chilly, remember to wear a light sweater underneath. Don't forget your small cloth." This wasn't Elena's usual elegant flowing script. It was fractured, disjointed, as if the writer had to exert immense effort to control the pen. Doubt flickered in Robert's mind like a small flame. He recalled the night of the squall, Elena standing in the rain, stating coldly, "I'm tired of playing the role of the devoted mother." A woman who disliked her family, who was selfish enough to neglect her stepdaughter. Why would she spend an entire month preparing such meticulous details, down to every pair of tights? Why would she write little notes of instruction for the child she allegedly wanted to discard? "Where did Elena say she was going, sweetheart?" Robert asked, his voice softening. "She said she was going somewhere with lots of sunshine." Bella answered casually while getting dressed. She said she wouldn't have headaches there anymore. Robert silently helped her button her shirt. The contradiction between Elena's words and actions confused him. It felt like he was looking at a jigsaw puzzle with the most crucial piece missing. On one side was the unstable woman laughing with an implement under the rain, and on the other was the stepmother meticulously folding every outfit for her stepdaughter. Which one was the real Elena? After dropping Bella off at school, Robert drove home. His head was pounding. The scattered pieces spun in his mind, the strongly unpalatable soup, the clump of hair filling the pillow, the blood-stained cloth, and now the smiley face stickers. He pulled into the familiar pharmacy at the end of the street. He desperately needed a strong dose of aspirin to alleviate this headache. "Hello, Mr. Robert. Long time no see." The elderly pharmacist adjusted his glasses, smiling a greeting. "While getting the medication," he asked casually, "is your wife feeling better? She came in last time and purchased so many bandages it worried me." Robert, who was pulling out his wallet to pay, froze. "Bandages? What did my wife purchase bandages for?" "Oh, you don't know." The pharmacist looked surprised. She bought a whole bundle of wound coverings and strong sanitizing wash. She said she had a fall and scraped herself all over. I noticed her hand was shaking severely. It took her a long time to count the money. Robert stood rooted to the spot. A fall, Elena didn't ride a motorcycle and rarely touched a bicycle. She mainly traveled by taxi or the family's vehicle. "Do you recall when she purchased them? Sometime around 2 or 3 weeks ago. She has lost so much weight I barely recognized her." Robert took the bottle of medication and walked to his car, saying nothing more. Wound coverings, blood-stained cloth, a nosebleed. No one uses an entire bundle of wound coverings for a nosebleed. Unless he started the car and sped off. A terrifying hypothesis began to form in his mind. Not an illness, but a darker secret, something she was trying desperately to hide. Abuse debt collectors harming her, or self-infliction. The car turned onto the road leading to the estate. From a distance, he saw the familiar silhouette of the neighbor, the woman infamous for being the neighborhood's gossip broadcaster. She was lurking near his gate, holding a large black refuse bag that had a huge tear. She was staring into the bag, her face expressing the utmost horror, as if she had just seen an apparition. Robert pressed the accelerator. His intuition told him that what she was staring at was the missing piece he was looking for. Robert slammed on the brakes right in front of the neighbor. She jumped, dropping the refuse bag to the ground. From the large tear inflicted by stray animals, the contents spilled out onto the clean sidewalk. Robert stepped out of the car and approached. A foul odor assaulted his nostrils. It wasn't the smell of food waste. It was the strong, pungent smell of medicinal substances mixed with a distinct, faint, acrid odor. "What are you doing in front of my house?" Robert asked, his displeasure evident in his tone. The neighbor didn't answer immediately. She just pointed a trembling finger at the mess on the ground, her face pale. You look. I was only trying to tidy it up. I never expected." Robert followed her finger. Scattered on the sidewalk were dozens of empty medication containers, their labels either peeled off or too faded to read. But the thing that struck him most powerfully wasn't the containers. It was adult absorbent undergarments. They lay strewn about bloated yellowish, clearly utilized. A few still bore streaks of dark brown residue. Robert's face flushed with embarrassment. He recognized the refuse bag. He had thrown it into the container this morning when cleaning Elena's room, but he hadn't bothered to look inside. "Your wife." The neighbor swallowed, then began to speak rapidly, a torrent of words. "I told you she's peculiar. Lately, every night I hear whimpering sounds coming from your house. Sometimes I hear loud crashing sounds like a confrontation. I thought you two were having marital troubles, but I never expected..." She leaned closer to Robert, whispering conspiratorially, her tone full of dark implication and disgust. "I saw her at the supermarket buying an entire cart full of adult absorbent undergarments. I asked who they were for, and she said it was a charity purchase for the senior residents." Pfft, Charity with those vacant, lifeless eyes, and her hands shaking uncontrollably. "And she always wears those dark protective lenses at night, walking around the house like a partially sighted person. She looks exactly like those addicts in the shantytown area south of the city, sir." Addict. The word exploded in Robert's mind like a bomb. Everything suddenly became terrifyingly logical. Rapid weight loss, erratic changing temperament, irritability, property damage, wearing dark protective lenses to hide vacant substance-addled eyes, using undergarments due to loss of bodily control while under the influence, buying wound coverings for self-administration or injuries sustained during hallucinations, and the extravagant spending on empty designer bags, perhaps to resell for purchasing prohibited substances. Robert felt nauseous. His stomach clenched. He had married an addict. He had allowed an addict to live with him and care for his daughter for the past 2 years. No wonder she frequently fed Bella strongly unpalatable soup, perhaps tranquilizers to keep the girl asleep, making her habit easier. "Go home," Robert said, his voice cutting off the neighbor coldly. "I will handle my own household matters. I was only trying to help you." She pouted, taking a few steps back, then retreated into her house, not forgetting to look back at the pile of undergarments with utter contempt. Robert gritted his teeth, bending down to gather the debris. He did so with profound disgust, wanting to eradicate all these contaminants from his life immediately. His decision to expel Elena during the squall now felt more correct than ever. He had unknowingly saved his daughter from a potentially fatal danger. Upon entering the house, Robert washed his hands with soap 3 times until his skin was red. He dried his hands, then immediately called his attorney. "Attorney Davis, it's me. How is the divorce proceeding? I'm drafting the paperwork, sir. But there's a small issue. Since Ms. Elena is absent, we need her passport number or identification documents to proceed with a unilateral filing." "All right, I will find them and send them to you immediately. Please expedite this. I want this matter concluded this week." Robert hung up. He didn't want to be involved with that woman for another second. He climbed the stairs, heading toward the master bedroom. This time, he wore a medical face covering and rubber gloves as if entering a contagious disease zone. The room still had a faint scent of peppermint, but now to Robert, it was the odor of concealment, the odor of transgression. He rummaged through the vanity table. Cosmetics and moisturizing creams were swept aside without mercy. No passport. He opened the closet, feeling through every handbag, every coat pocket. Still nothing. His frustration reached its peak. She had hidden them well, or had she taken them with her to flee? But she left empty-handed that night. Confound it. Robert kicked the bedside table forcefully. The sharp pain in his big toe intensified his rage. Clank. The strong kick made the bedside cabinet rattle violently. A metallic sound echoed from beneath the cabinet, a strange sound unlike wood or plastic. Robert paused. He had never heard that sound in the bedroom before. He knelt down on the floor, turned on his phone flashlight, and aimed it into the dark space beneath the cabinet. Tucked deep in the corner, pushed far back as if to be permanently hidden, was a rectangular metal tin. The exterior paint was peeling, and rust clung to the edges. It was the type of old Danish cookie tin people often used to store sewing needles and thread. Why would Elena, a stylish woman who only used designer items, hide a rusty metal tin beneath the bed? Robert reached in and pulled the tin out. A thick layer of dust covering the lid bore the clear imprint of fingerprints, proving it had been frequently retrieved and put away. He held his breath, placing the tin on his lap. A heavy feeling weighed on his chest. What terrible secret, he wondered, lay within this ancient tin? If he were Robert, would he dare to open it? Robert sat heavily on the cold floor, the rusty metal tin perched on his lap like a ticking explosive device. He traced the fingerprints etched into the thick layer of dust covering the lid, evidence of frequent secretive and hurried contact. He pulled a utility blade from his coat pocket, the cold steel clicking open. Taking a deep breath, he pried the lid open. The sound of rusty metal protesting was a grinding screech echoing in the silent room. The lid popped open. Robert squinted, bracing himself for white powdery packets or vulgar photos. But no, there was no smell of prohibited substances, only a strange odor that rushed straight to his nose, a strong antiseptic alcohol scent mixed with the smell of old damp paper. The distinct smell of a medical facility of decline and the end of life. Inside, various empty medicinal blister packs lay chaotically. Robert picked one up, squinting to read the tiny print on the silver foil: morphine sulfate. Indication: severe pain management. Morphine. Why would a seemingly healthy person who merely scraped herself in a fall, as she claimed, need high-dose pain management medication typically reserved for patients in the advanced stages of an illness? Robert's hand began to tremble. He swept the blister packs aside. Beneath the layer of medication wrappers was a thick folder held together by a rusty paper clip. The cover bore a familiar, heartbreaking blue logo: Central Oncology Hospital. He opened the folder. The first page hit his eyes with bold, clear, and cruel printing, like a verdict of the end: patient Elena Wilson, age 32, diagnosis glioblastoma, multiform stage 4, prognosis 3-6 months. Robert's whole world seemed to collapse. Every sound around him, the wind whistling outside the window, the ticking clock, vanished, leaving only a deafening ringing in his head. Brain tumor. Stage 4. Elena. He flipped through the file pages like a frantic person searching for a mistake, a typing error. But the more he read, the starker the dry medical terminology became, explaining all her instability over the past period. Tumor pressing on optic nerve tactutes. Symptoms: extreme sensitivity to light, intense orbital pain, severe vision impairment. Robert dropped the folder onto his lap. Protective lenses. The pitch-black protective lenses she wore day and night, the lenses he and the neighbor had scorned as dramatic and signs of addiction. She wore them not to hide drug-induced lethargy. She wore them because the electric lights in the sunlight were like thousands of needles piercing her eyeballs. He turned to the next page. Tumor invasion of the motor cortex area. Symptoms: involuntary facial muscle spasms, loss of expressive control, distorted smirk, inappropriate outbursts of light-hearted sounds or crying, hand and foot tremors, loss of sphincter control, incontinence. The image of Elena standing in the rainstorm rushed back to Robert's mind. The distorted, bizarre smirk he had interpreted as defiance, as madness, the implement moving soil to cover up the fractured glass, and the pile of adult undergarments scattered outside the house this morning. She wasn't making light-hearted sounds because she was happy. She wasn't making light-hearted sounds because she was emotionally compromised. She was making light-hearted sounds because the pain was tearing her brain apart, causing her nerves to spasm repeatedly, pulling her face into a grotesque shape that even she couldn't control. And those undergarments. Robert felt his insides twist. A young, beautiful, proud woman like Elena, having to secretly purchase adult pads, having to hide that profound shame under the guise of charity just to preserve a shred of dignity before her husband and child. What had he called her? An addict. A cruel woman, Mentally disturbed, Robert buried his head in his hands, his fingers tightly clutching his hair. He wanted to scream, but his throat was constricted. He had banished a dying wife from his home. He had pushed her into the cold mud when she was trying to protect his daughter from sharp glass fragments. At the bottom of the metal tin lay a small blue notebook. The cover was worn and dog-eared. Robert picked it up his hand, shaking so much he nearly dropped it. He assumed this was where she recorded evidence of infidelity or plans to seize assets, as he had long suspected. He opened it, hoping to find a reason to feel less guilty, a reason to dislike her. But there were no schemes, no lovers. Only handwritten entries, the handwriting uneven, sometimes dark, sometimes faint, like the erratic beat of a fading heart. May the 12th. I fell in the bathroom again today. It hurts so much. My head feels like it's being hammered. Had to crawl out to get the wound coverings. Thankfully, Robert wasn't home yet. Must hide them carefully. Cannot let him see. If he knows, he will force me to go to a medical facility, and he will look at me with pity. I want my final days to be at home, being a normal wife and mother, not a patient. Robert's tears fell onto the page, blurring the word normal. She had endured that pain alone in the darkness, in profound solitude, just to maintain a fabricated peace for this home. May 20th. Bella is starting to fear me. Today, I accidentally dropped a bowl of warm soup. The girl screamed. I wanted to hug her and apologize, but my hands were shaking too much to lift them. Robert looked at me like I was a monster. Good. Let him despise me. The more he hates me, the less heartbroken he will be when I'm gone. I don't deserve to be loved anymore. He quickly flipped through the pages. Every sentence was like a dagger plunging into his heart. June 1st. The doctor said I only have 2 months left. I must hurry. I need to train Bella to be independent. I need to teach her to pick out her own clothes to feed herself. I must play the role of the wicked stepmother. I won't cook her favorite foods anymore. I'll force her to do things herself. If the girl dislikes me, she will be stronger when I'm not around. Better for her to dislike a cruel stepmother than to see her mother frail and distorted like this. Forgive me, Bella. I love you more than my own existence. Robert let out a broken, agonizing sob. The sound echoed and shattered the stillness of the empty room. It turned out her coldness, her strictness, the strongly unpalatable soup, perhaps she secretly added nutritional supplements, but lied about the taste to encourage the girl to eat regularly, were all a pretense. A cruel performance she authored and starred in, taking on the villain role herself to prepare him and his daughter for a future without her. She had loved him and his daughter in the most painful, foolish way. She sacrificed her honor and the last vestiges of affection from her loved ones, only so they wouldn't have to bear too great a loss. Robert flipped to the final page. The paper was wrinkled, stained with circular marks, Elena's tears. The handwriting was sparse, trembling, barely legible, as if written with the last ounce of her failing strength. Robert, I apologize. I apologize that I cannot travel with you to the end of the road. I apologize for becoming a burden, a source of shame for you. I am leaving. Do not search for me. Allow me to pass away somewhere you cannot see, so that in your memory, I will remain the beautiful Elena of the past. Please tend to the rose bushes I planted over the small burial site in the garden. That is my farewell present. I hope that next spring the flowers will bloom brilliantly and gaze upon you both for me. No. Elena. No, Robert screamed, the sound tearing at his throat. He clutched the notebook tightly to his chest, burying his head in the cold metal tin. Regret surged like a tidal wave, sweeping away all his logic and pride. He remembered that rainy night. He had pushed her down. He had pointed his finger and banished her. He had slammed the door shut, leaving her to walk away alone in the darkness, isolated and in distress. What had she been thinking at that moment? Did she hold resentment toward him? Or was she still managing a distorted smirk behind the protective lenses, secretly thanking him for helping her complete her final performance? His tears streamed down his face, mixing with the dust of time on the floor. The last sentence in the notebook blurred, but it was deeply engraved in his soul, a scar that would never heal. Please tend to the rose bushes. She was still concerned about the rose bushes. She was still concerned about the deceased aunts. She was still concerned about Bella. And him. What concern had he shown her besides suspicion and expulsion? Robert raised his head, his eyes bloodshot and swollen. He couldn't let her pass away alone like that. He had to find her. Wherever she was, whatever her condition, he had to find her. He had to kneel at her feet, beg for her forgiveness, even though he knew he could never fully atone for his mistakes in this lifetime. He stood up stumbling as he rushed out of the room, still clinging to the diary like a final lifeline. Robert staggered to his feet, his knees numb. He was like a sleepwalker who had just awakened in a nightmare, his hand still tightly gripping the diary, as if it were the only thread keeping him connected to reality. Scattered on the cold wooden floor around him were small yellow sticky notes that had fallen out of the notebook. They lay haphazardly fragile, like dry leaves falling from a dying tree. He sat down, picking up each note. His hand trembled as he smoothed out the crumpled creases. He devoured every word, every comma, every period like a parched person finding the last drop of water in the desert. Each scribbled line was a dagger stabbing into his heart, exposing the cruel truth he had been blindly denying all along. The first note was dated June 15th. The handwriting was shaky, the ink blurred in a few spots. Bella hates me now. Good. Today she screamed that she wanted her biological mother back. My heart aches more than the tumor, but better for the girl to hate her stepmother than to see her mother losing all her hair. Robert closed his eyes, a sharp pain radiating in his chest. He remembered that day. Bella had run to him crying that her mother Elena had harshly yanked her hair. He had flown into a rage, severely scolding Elena in front of his daughter. Elena hadn't said a word, then merely retreating silently to her room and closing the door. He had thought it was remorse or her contempt, but now he knew she was silent to hide the clumps of hair shedding onto her shoulders. She allowed Bella to hate her so the girl wouldn't have to witness the sight of a frail, ailing mother. She chose to be the witch in her daughter's eyes, to keep the girl's childhood memories intact, free from the shadow of passing and separation. He picked up the next note, a crumpled receipt clipped between two notes. Polarized protective lenses, 100% UV protection for patients recovering from eye surgery or light sensitivity. The date of purchase coincided with the day she started wearing the lenses indoors. Robert stared at the receipt, a bitter laugh escaping him. Hot tears streamed from his eyes. He had once mocked her as attention-seeking, imitating B-list celebrities. The neighbor had called her an addict. The whole world had judged her by those dark lenses. But no one knew that behind the dark lenses were eyes in extreme pain from the light. Every sunbeam that slipped through the curtain, every electric light switched on, was like 1,000 needles pricking her eyeballs. She wore the lenses not to hide substance-induced lethargy, but to protect her last remaining vision, to be able to see him and his daughter for one more day. His past ridicule now returned, transforming into poisoned arrows piercing his core. He was her husband, the person who shared her life, yet he was the one who misunderstood her most profoundly, the one who was cruelest to her. Robert stood up, staggering toward Elena's closet. The heavy oak door opened, releasing the smell of damp wood and peppermint. Previously, every time he opened this closet, he felt annoyed by the piles of designer handbags he considered superficial. Wasteful woman, only knows how to spend her husband's money. He had once said that. Now he looked at the neatly arranged Chanel and Dior bags on the shelf. He reached out and took down a sleek black leather bag. It was featherlight. He opened the clasp. Empty. He took the next one. Also empty. He rummaged through all of them. No expensive cosmetics, no luxurious perfumes inside. Just empty shells. His hand touched the inner lining of an old handbag. Something felt bulky. He slipped his hand into a small slit opening in the lining fabric. A savings passbook fell out. Robert picked it up. Beneficiary name, Bella Wilson. Clipped inside was a pale pink note, the kind of paper Elena used for grocery lists. Money from selling jewelry and savings from grocery shopping. Saved for Bella's university education. I apologize that I won't be able to braid your hair on your graduation day. I apologize that I won't be able to help you choose your wedding gown. Consider this money my late wedding gift. May you be happy, my little princess. Robert cried out in agony, punching the wall fiercely. The sound of his knuckles hitting the hard surface echoed sharply. Blood oozed from his finger joints, but he felt no physical pain. This physical agony was nothing compared to the self-torment tearing apart his soul. It turned out those empty designer bags were a facade for her to gradually sell her jewelry, saving every penny for his daughter. She accepted the reputation of being a gold digger, a spendthrift, just to save for the future of a child not even biologically hers. What had he done? He had banished a dying woman from his home. He had pushed her into the cold mud. He had hurled harsh words at her when she was using her last bit of strength to worry about his daughter. He had treated the benefactor of his child like a wretched stray animal. I am a complete failure. A total failure. Robert slapped his own face, tears streaming down and mixing with the blood on his hands. He couldn't forgive himself. He didn't deserve her silent, noble love. He had to find her. Right now. Whether she was alive or gone, he had to find her. Robert stumbled down the stairs, his footsteps faltering, nearly causing him to fall. He rushed into the living room, grabbing his car keys off the table. His hands were shaking so much he dropped the keys to the floor. He bent down to pick them up, only to drop them again. The third time he knelt down, completely breathing heavily, trying to steady his disobedient hands. Daddy Bella's timid call came from her bedroom doorway. She was hugging her stuffed toy, her eyes wide with confusion, as she looked at her father kneeling on the floor, his hands bloody, his face stained with tears. Robert looked up at her. The image of Elena meticulously placing stickers on Bella's clothes flashed back. He lunged forward, enveloping the girl in a tight embrace. He squeezed her close, as if trying to transfer all his remorse to her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry," Robert choked out, his voice cracking. "I was wrong. I was completely wrong. Daddy, why are you crying?" Bella was alarmed, raising her small hand to wipe away his tears. "Does your hand hurt?" "No, I'm not hurting." Robert shook his head, looking straight into her eyes. "Elena isn't bad, sweetheart. She's not a witch. She's sick, very sick. She did everything for you for Daddy. She's sick." Sir Bella looked blankly. "Then why didn't she take the strongly unpalatable medicine?" She said unpalatable substances often aid recovery. The girl's innocent question was like rubbing salt into Robert's wound. She took it, but her illness is too severe. Robert stood up, letting go of his daughter. "I have to go find her. I have to bring her home. You stay here and be good, lock the door carefully. I'm going to bring Mommy back for you. You promise, I promise." Robert rushed out the door, leaving Bella standing there watching him. His solitary, hurried silhouette disappeared behind the heavy wooden door. His sports car roared as it sped away into the dark night. Robert pressed the accelerator to the floor. The streetlights flashed by like blurry streaks of light. He didn't know where Elena was, but he knew he couldn't stop. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number of the treating doctor listed in the medical file. The ringtone stretched out steady and despairing. Each ring was like a countdown from the end of life. "Please, answer the phone." "Please," Robert muttered, drenched in cold sweat. On the 10th ring, someone answered. "Hello." A deep, unfamiliar voice responded, accompanied by the clatter of metal carts in the background. "Is this Dr. Carter? I am Elena Wilson's husband." "My wife? Where is my wife?" Robert shouted into the phone, his voice strained with fear. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then the deep voice replied, cold and detached, "Dr. Carter has just stepped out. This is the attendant on duty at the facility's storage area for the departed. Storage area for the departed." The two words exploded in Robert's head, causing the steering wheel to swerve. The car skidded, nearly driving onto the concrete median. The world before him went black. No, it couldn't be. The sound of screeching tires tore through the quiet night. Robert's sports car slid for a long distance, missing the concrete divider by mere inches. Cold sweat soaked his forehead. Storage area for the departed. He stammered into the phone, his voice shattered. Did you just say storage area for the departed? I apologize, my sincere apologies, sir. A rustling sound came from the other end, as if the person was frantically transferring the call. I'm the night attendant. I took the wrong internal line. This is the medical facility duty room. Dr. Carter is right here. Robert slumped over the steering wheel, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. She wasn't gone. There was still a chance. This is Carter, a warm, middle-aged man's voice responded. My wife, Elena Wilson. How is she? You are her husband. Dr. Carter's voice carried a hint of surprise and reproach. We tried to contact you several times, but were unsuccessful. Ms. Elena signed papers refusing aggressive care 3 days ago. She didn't want to stay in a medical facility any longer. Where did she go? The Sunset Senior Residence. In the Pine Forest area north of the suburbs. She said she wanted to find a peaceful place to conclude her time. Conclude her time, Robert roared. No one is concluding anything. I'm heading there right now. He tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, sharply turning the wheel 180 degrees. The car roared, speeding toward the north. It began to rain. Heavy raindrops lashed violently against the windshield, blurring the faint yellow streetlights. The scene was identical to the night he banished her. The same rain, the same darkness, and the same stupid cruelty from him. Each swish of the wipers was like the ticking of a doomsday clock, reminding him of his unforgivable error. Faster, even faster. He pressed the accelerator to the floor. The speedometer needle crept into the dangerous zone. He didn't care. He just needed to see her, just needed her to still be taking air. An hour later, Robert turned onto the bumpy dirt road leading into the pine forest. The Sunset Senior Residence appeared dimly in the rain. It was an old building constructed of red brick moss clinging to the base, isolated and desolate, completely cut off from the outside world. Without the extravagance of a private medical facility, the place exuded the gloom and quiet solitude of life's final phases. Robert parked his car haphazardly right in front of the main entrance, rushing out without an umbrella. The rain soaked his expensive suit, his hair plastered to his forehead. Elena Wilson. What room is my wife in? He burst into the reception counter, his labored breathing startling the night nurse, causing her to drop her pen. She looked at the distinguished but disheveled man before her with a mix of pity and concern. Room 305, the special care unit at the end of the hall. But sir, visiting hours have... Robert didn't wait for her to finish. He rushed like a whirlwind toward the long, dim hallway. The hallway was deserted, only the rapid sound of his footsteps echoing on the cold tile floor. The strong antiseptic odor mixed with the damp smell of the old building hit his nose. Each closed door he passed seemed to contain a sad story. And as Elena was behind that very last door. He stopped in front of room 305. His hand rested on the doorknob, trembling. He was afraid. For the first time in his life, the man who always confidently controlled everything felt absolute terror. He was afraid to face the consequences of his own actions. He was afraid of what he was about to see. Click. The door was gently pushed open. The room was pitch black. The window curtains were tightly drawn, blocking out all light. Only the faint blue light from the heart monitor blinked, emitting a steady, monotonous beep, beep, beep. Robert held his breath, cautiously stepping inside. His eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness. On the simple metal bed in the corner, a small figure lay motionless under a thin blanket. She was too thin, so thin that the blanket was almost flat, only slightly raised over her chest. Elena lay there. She was no longer wearing the pitch-black protective lenses. Her face was gaunt. Her cheekbones pronounced, her eye sockets deeply shadowed and dark. Her once lustrous, long black hair was now sparse, revealing patches of white scalp. Robert bit his lip hard to prevent himself from bursting into tears. Was this the wife he had called an addict, a gold digger? He approached, dropping to his knees beside the bed. His hand trembled as he gently touched her cold cheek. "Elena," he whispered. Elena's body jerked. She curled up, tucking her head under the blanket instinctively like a wounded small animal fearful of a predator. "Who is it?" Her voice was faint, hoarse, and filled with panic. "Don't banish me. I won't make any noise. I'll leave right away." That delirious statement was like a knife stabbing through Robert's heart, twisting deep into his core. Even in her fading state, her greatest fear was being driven away by him. She still thought she was a burden, a contaminant that needed to be cleaned up. No, no one is driving you away. Robert choked out hot tears streaming down his face. He grasped her bony hand, pressing it tightly against his cheek. "It's me. It's Robert. I came to take you home." Elena lay still. Her breathing was heavy, fragmented. Slowly, her eyes opened, but those eyes didn't look at him. They were cloudy, unfocused, staring fixedly at the dark ceiling. The tumor had stolen her last bit of vision. She was completely sightless. Her hand groped weakly, tremblingly in the air. She tried to identify who was weeping beside her, who was holding her hand so tightly. Her thin fingers touched Robert's tear-soaked face, then slid down to his chin, his collar, and stopped at his left hand. Her fingertip touched the plain gold wedding band on his ring finger. She froze. A faint, distorted smirk appeared on her face, contorted by pain. That expression held no joy, only a sorrowful resignation. "Robert," she whispered, her voice as light as a breath. "Did you come to reclaim the ring? I apologize. I took it off and put it in the drawer. I was afraid of scratching it." Robert shook his head, tears streaming. Although he knew Elena could no longer see, he knelt down, pressing his face against her cold hand. That terrible misunderstanding, the thought that he had only come to reclaim the wedding ring, was like rubbing more salt into his bleeding heart. "No, Elena." Robert spoke, his voice caught in his throat. "I didn't come for the ring. I came to take you home. To our house." Elena's body stiffened. She pulled her hand back weakly, shaking her head on the pillow. "I can't, Robert. I look awful. I don't want Bella to see me like this. She'll be frightened. Please let me stay here. The girl's waiting for you," Robert insisted, holding her hand tightly, refusing to let her avoid him. "Bella said the chicken soup I made was terrible, too salty. She misses your strongly unpalatable soup. She misses Mommy Elena." The words, Mommy Elena, made her thin shoulders tremble violently. She said nothing more, only closed her eyes, two streams of tears flowing from her sightless eyes. Robert didn't wait another moment. He bent down, wrapping his arms around her, lifting her up. Her body was feather-light, bony, as if he were carrying a child or a tattered rag doll. He held her tightly, walking out of the room, heavy with the smell of antiseptic wash. In the emergency transport speeding through the rainy night, Elena lay nestled in Robert's arms. Her head rested on his chest where his heart beat strongly and warmly. She began to speak, her voice faint and broken, as if wanting to release all the burdens in her heart before it was too late. "That night, my head was pounding so hard, I dropped the ant habitat. I was afraid Bella would cry seeing the fractured glass. I was afraid she would be injured, so I took it out to bury it. I didn't intend to make that light-hearted sound, Robert. My facial muscles, they just spasmed. I was in immense distress, but I couldn't cry." Robert kissed her forehead, kissing away the cold sweat that beaded there. "I know now. I apologize. I know everything. Don't talk anymore, darling. Rest." The vehicle stopped in front of the estate gates. The wooden door opened. Warm yellow light streamed onto the porch. Bella was standing there. The girl was wearing her bear-patterned pajamas, hugging her old stuffed toy. Robert carried Elena in. He was afraid Bella would be alarmed to see Elena's gaunt, altered face. But no. Bella ran over. She didn't look at the cloudy, lifeless eyes, didn't look at the distorted expression. She grasped Elena's thin, dangling hand, pressing it tightly against her cheek. "Mommy." The clear call rang out, sweeping away all awkwardness and fear. "Mommy, you're home. Daddy's chicken soup was awful today, too salty. You're home now to teach Daddy how to cook." Elena couldn't see her daughter, but she felt the warmth of Bella's chubby cheek, felt the tiny fingers gripping her hand tightly. A tear rolled down her cheek, falling onto the girl's hand. "Yes, Mommy's home. I'll teach Daddy. I promise." The wall of ice she had built for so long, the coldness, the distance, the role of the cruel stepmother, all completely melted in that moment. She no longer needed to pretend. She was allowed to be vulnerable, allowed to love, and allowed to be loved in return. Elena's final days passed with strange tranquility. The estate was no longer gloomy. Robert drew the master bedroom curtains slightly, leaving only the thin sheer fabric allowing the soft light of autumn to filter in. He wanted Elena to feel the warmth of the sun, even though she could no longer see it. Robert completely stopped working. He and Bella took turns staying by her bedside. They read to her. Robert read the dry economic news she used to pretend to listen to intently just to please him. Bella read fairy tales, her voice chirping about princesses and princes. Elena lay there serene. The severe pain seemed to have receded. The presence of her family was the most effective soothing remedy, surpassing any morphine. She began to give instructions. Her voice was weak but clear. "Bella, remember the blue sweater goes with the white skirt. Don't wear it with the red pants, it looks silly." "Yes, Mommy. Your hair's long, ask Daddy to braid it neatly. Don't just tie it up that causes headaches." "Yes, Mommy." "Robert, please remember to nourish the rose bushes in the garden. Don't give them too much. They'll rot." "I remember. I wrote it down." Robert held her hand, trying to keep his voice steady. It was the afternoon of the 4th day since she came home. The sun was pleasant. The autumn breeze rustled through the window frame. Elena stirred. She turned her sightless eyes toward the sound of Bella. "Bella, sing for Mommy. That Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star song. I like hearing you sing best." Bella, who was sitting next to her drawing, quickly put down her pen. She climbed onto the bed lying beside her mother. She suppressed the sob caught in her throat, taking a deep breath. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you are." The clear, innocent singing voice resonated, echoing throughout the quiet room. Robert sat on the other side of the bed, tightly holding Elena's left hand. He placed his finger on her wrist pulse. The beat was fading. Thump, thump, slow, fragmented. Slow. Elena smiled. This time her smile was complete. Her facial muscles relaxed, serene. There was no longer the distortion of distress. She looked as beautiful as the first day he met her by the piano, up above the world, so high, like a diamond in the sky. Bella's singing faded, merging with the wind. Elena's breath was as light as smoke. Her chest stopped moving. The pulse beneath Robert's fingers ceased entirely. She was gone, peaceful like a candle that had burned itself out and flickered away in the breeze. There was no struggle, no fear, only absolute calm. Robert did not wail. His profound sorrow had solidified into a quiet stillness. He leaned down, gently kissing her forehead, a cold kiss that held all his love. He gently stroked her closed eyes. "Sleep well, my princess." He turned and embraced Bella. The girl had stopped singing. She understood what had just happened. The two held onto each other tightly, sitting in silence in the sacred moment of departure. A large, dark-winged moth flew in from the garden through the slightly open window. It circled the room once, then landed gently on Elena's still hand. It fluttered its wings once, then soared high, vanishing into the deep twilight sky outside. Winter passed, carrying away the coldness and gloom. Spring returned to the New York suburbs, awakening all things from a long slumber. Robert's estate had changed. The heavy gray curtains had been replaced by bright cream silk drapes. The windows were always wide open, welcoming the sun and breeze. Robert stood in the backyard holding a hot cup of coffee. He looked down at the corner of the garden where once there had been a muddy, empty plot of land, where he had once shoved Elena down in the rainstorm, where she had quietly worked to bury the fragmented glass of the ant habitat. Now that spot was a vibrant cluster of velvet roses. The deep crimson flowers, as large as teacups, bloomed proudly under the sunlight. Their petals were soft as velvet, exuding a gentle fragrance. Their powerful vitality was an affirmation from distress beauty can still sprout. "Daddy, look at this." Bella's clear call rang out. The girl ran from the house, her hair neatly styled in 2 braids, exactly as Elena had once instructed. She was wearing the outfit from the Day 60 bag. Though that day had long passed, she still enjoyed wearing the outfit repeatedly. In Bella's hand was a small green watering can. She ran to the rosebush, carefully watering the base of the plant, avoiding wetting the leaves as her father had taught her. "Look, Daddy, this bud is larger than it was yesterday. I bet Mommy Elena worked some magic." Robert smiled, setting his coffee cup down on the stone bench. He squatted beside his daughter, gazing at the flowers. "That's right. Mommy Elena is incredibly clever. She turned sad moments into beautiful flowers for you to enjoy." Bella watered the plant, whispering to the rosebush as if talking to a close friend. "Mommy, I got a perfect score on my math assessment today. My teacher also complimented my neat handwriting. Oh, and Daddy Robert has been well behaved lately. He doesn't burn the chicken soup anymore, but it's still a little bland, Mommy." Robert chuckled softly. He was no longer the work-obsessed man whose face was perpetually scowling and glued to his phone. He had learned to slow down. He had learned to appreciate every dinner, every trivial story his daughter told. It was the priceless lesson Elena had used her very life to teach him. He reached into his inner coat pocket, retrieving a small object. It was Elena's dark protective lenses, the only memento he kept close. The lenses that were once a symbol of distance, of misunderstanding, were now a priceless treasure to him. He placed the lenses onto Bella's old stuffed toy, which sat proudly on the stone bench next to the rosebush. "Wow, Bear looks so cool, Daddy." Bella cheered excitedly, clapping her hands. Just like superstar Mommy Elena, Robert adjusted the lenses on the bear, his gaze soft and distant. "That's right, sweetheart. Mommy was a superstar. She wore the lenses to guard her eyes, to preserve all the light and joy for us." The spring breeze swept through the garden, rustling the deep crimson rose petals. The floral fragrance wafted through the air, overriding the damp smell of the past. The space was filled with vitality and anticipation. The father and daughter held hands, walking along the small stone path around the garden. Their shadows, one large, one small, stretched out on the lush green lawn, blending together, solid and warm. Robert looked up at the azure sky, not a single cloud in sight. He knew Elena was up there somewhere, smiling down. She hadn't vanished. She was alive in every flower, every smile of Bella, and in his own heart, which had been mended. He silently thanked her. Thanked her for arriving, for loving, and for teaching him what true devotion was. Devotion sometimes doesn't need to be perceived with the eyes or heard with the ears. Devotion must be felt with the heart's absolute conviction.